By late afternoon, when the sun seems to hide in shame behind the heavy clouds, it is already there, sitting on the mud bench, his body motionless as if it had rooted itself in that dry ground, cracked by hunger and time. Matsi Chaik, this is what some call him, although few know his name. Most just ignore it. To the children who play barefoot among the mud puddles and the strong smell of palm oil, he is the lost sheep, a strange, silent figure with a thick beard and wind-worn clothes. An old man with eyes so sunken that they seem to hide a whole ocean of memories. He doesn't ask for anything. He doesn't look anyone in the eye. Just wait, like someone who has lost everything, but still carries something a secret, perhaps, or a guilt that refuses to die. His pain has no scream. She lives in silence, in the way he shrugs his shoulders at each loud noise, as if waiting for something that never comes, in the way he touches, with thick fingers, the edge of that clay bench, as if it were an altar of memory. Every day at the same time, he appears. He sits down. Wait. And every day, life goes on around without realizing it. But no one wonders what that man was doing before he got there. No one imagines that long ago, he slept on silk sheets, with air conditioning blowing on his feet, and meetings scheduled to discuss millions. No one sees what he buried. No one understands what he left behind. It is easy to forget those who were silent. It is easy to mock those who stopped in the middle of the road of life. But there are silences that scream, and there are falls that are not defeats. They are choices. Chaik chose to disappear. He chose to exchange the clean mirrors in Lecky's apartments for that rough, dust-covered bench. He didn't just lose his wealth. He lost his name. He lost his ground. And perhaps he has also lost a desire to be seen. What brought him, there no one knows. But there's something in your eyes, a shadow that is not of ordinary sadness. It is deeper. It is older, as if he carried the mourning of many lives, as if his soul had been broken in silence, and that bench was the only place where the shards could still rest. And even so, every day he comes back. Every day he waits. We don't know what. Maybe pardon. Maybe forgetfulness. Perhaps just a simple gesture that says, without words, I see you. But so far, that has never come. Until one day, a woman approaches with a plate of jollof rice and akra, and the silence begins, little by little, to change color. The morning was still yawning when she arrived, her oil-stained apron and the steaming pan in her hands. Ngozi. No one knew his last name. No one asked. It was only Ngozi who was a woman in the wooden diner, the one who served unhurriedly, the one who smiled out of the corner of her eye, even when the world ached inside. She approached every day with firm steps, placing a modest plate in front of the man on the bench, jollof rice, hot akra, and sometimes a fried plantain when left over. And he, always silent, only made a slight nod of his head. I never asked. I never thanked him. But he ate. And in this silent ritual there was something older than words, a subtle, invisible connection, as if that gesture was not only sustenance, it was also a memory. That day, however, something different hung in the air. As she bent down to leave the plate, her eyes crossed his. It was fast, half a second. But in that look, Chaik froze. There, among the simple features of Ngozi's face, there was an ancient shadow, a fragment of time that he tried to bury. The way she pressed her lips together as she carried the plate, the way she looked away when she heard loud laughter, the dull sparkle in the back of her eyes, everything about him said he had seen it before. It wasn't the same person, but it was the same gesture, the same generous silence, the same kind of presence that, even tired, does not stop giving. Chaik turned his face away. He pretended to look at the ground, but inside him, something was slowly breaking, as if the memory, locked for years behind an iron door, began to creak again. Would it be possible? She would be someone's relative? A shadow of the past that returned to the crack of fate? Or was it just your mind, tired and burdened with grief, projecting old faces onto new ones? He didn't know, but the discomfort was real. It was as if, unintentionally, she had touched a wound that was still open, a wound that he preferred not to name. And she, even without understanding, seemed to feel it. Because that day, she didn't say anything. He just left his plate, looked up at the sky for a moment, and returned to his diner. But in that brief meeting of eyes, Chaik's floor shook, not for the food, not for the gesture, but for the memory that refused to die. Because sometimes the face of the one who offers the bread is the mirror of a time when the soul still believed that it was possible to be saved. And in that face, in that gesture, he saw something that hurt more than all the absences. He saw the goodness, That same goodness he once knew and lost. Ngozi was not born knowing how to be strong. She learned. She learned when the scream of protest drowned out her husband's promises, and he never returned. She learned when her children's eyes asked, "Will there be dinner today?" And she didn't know how to answer. She learned to smile even on an empty stomach, to lend hope even when hers was hanging by a thread. It was not made of steel. It was made from scratch. She buried herself in the hard ground of life, and even though she was hurt, she continued to support the house with tired arms and stubborn faith. The snack bar was small, a square of wood with the smell of pepper and smoke. But it was what she had, and that was where she served. He served men in a hurry, exhausted women, children in bored uniforms. He served with the same care with which a griot would tell a sacred story. It was useful because it reminded her of the day when she herself had nothing, and an old woman, almost blind, gave her a ripe mango without saying a word. It was on that day, under the scorching sun, that she learned there are gestures that save the soul before the body. Since then, she has sworn, whenever she could, she would give something to someone the world had forgotten. She didn't know the name of the man on the clay bench. I didn't even ask. I could only see, in his slumped shoulders and in his silence, a pain that he knew, a pain that does not scream, but weighs, a pain that she herself has already carried. Therefore, when she placed the plate in front of him, it was not out of charity. It was by memory, for the honor of that old woman with the sleeve, for silent justice, because I knew that sometimes a plate of food is more than sustenance. It's recognition. It is to say without saying, "I see you," even if no one else sees it. And so she went on, day after day, without expecting anything in return, without even imagining who that man was. For her, the name or the past did not matter. Only the present mattered. It was only important to continue. And in that simple constancy, there was a greatness that no one saw, because there are hearts that have learned to lose everything but compassion. Ngozi was one of those hearts, one of those miracles hidden in the dust of everyday life. A woman who gave without waiting. Before the clay bench, there was glass, there was marble, there were shag carpets that muffled the footsteps of men in suits, and there was a leather chair that spun on top of a building in Lekki, from which the sea could be seen shining like promise. It was there that Chaik decided the fate of thousands. Founder of one of the largest microcredit companies in the country. His signature opened doors. His name filled headlines. His voice was heard with reverence. But all greatness has a price. And sometimes this price comes disguised as applause. The coup did not come from outside. It came from within, of the partners he welcomed as brothers, of the friends who swore allegiance with glasses raised, but had daggers in their jacket pockets. A detour here, a betrayal there, and everything he built began to crumble like chaff in the face of fire. But he would have endured financial ruin. I would have rebuilt. I would have forgiven. What he couldn't stand was what came after the death of his only son. A 14-year-old boy, shy, in love with books and simple prayers. A boy who only wanted his father at home. A boy who was hit by a fleeing van, surrounded by paparazzi thirsty for an image of the falling man. The pain was so great that Chaik ceased to be. There was no more sense. He threw the gold watch into the river, tore documents, burned photos. He started to walk the roads as an anonymous person, like a living mourning. And in the midst of the silent exile, he found that forgotten neighborhood, that diner, that clay bench. There, no one recognized him. There, he could be just one more among the forgotten, a man without a past, a father without a son, a billionaire with no name. And that, in some strange way, relieved him. Because when you lose what matters most, the rest becomes weight. Money becomes a curse, success ruin, and everything that once shone is now blinding. That is why he chose to remain silent. He chose the powder. He chose the bank. Not because of defeat, but because of fatigue. Because there are pains that are not cured with medicine or revenge, only with silence. And he made this silence his dwelling place, until a woman's gesture began to crack him inside. And, without realizing it, he began to remembering who he was, and even more, remembering someone who had been saved by a sacrifice that he never knew how to thank. Still, the rain fell thickly, without warning, washing the streets in silence. The thunder no longer scared Ngozi. She had already survived greater thunder within her soul. But that afternoon, the water that fell from the sky seemed to join the water she held in her eyes. The younger boy was sick, high fever, short breath. The money I had was enough for the medicine or for frying oil. One of the two. She chose the medicine. And that day, the pot was empty, the cafeteria closed, and the jollof rice dish that never stopped serving did not appear. Chaik felt the emptiness in time, not in her stomach. Her absence was like an invisible rope that broke. For a moment, he hesitated, but something pushed him beyond the bank. Perhaps it was a memory of his son, or the reflection of an old gesture. He stood up, his knees creaking like old doors, and he walked, his feet heavy in the mud, his hands trembling as he pulled back the afternoon curtain. Ngozi's house was modest, small, but there was a dignity in her that resisted even the dampness of the walls. Chaik approached with respect, and there, through the half-open window, he saw something that made him freeze. An altar, simple, covered by an embroidered cloth, and in the center, a black and white photo. The serious face, the attentive eyes. He knew that man. Obiora. The image came whole, smelling of blood and dust. The faithful security guard who ran to protect him that day years ago when the kidnappers tried to take him. Obiora was quick. He was brave. He was loyal. He died with his body stretched out over his. Chaik never forgot the last sentence he heard. "Run, sir." And he ran. But he never came back to thank him. He never sought to know if Obiora had a family. He never faced that grief. Until that moment, the air in the house seemed denser, most sacred. Chaik felt his legs fail. He sat on the floor of the porch as if asking for forgiveness without knowing how to say it. That was why. She was Obiora's sister. And even without knowing it, he was taking care of the man his brother gave his life to save. Her gesture was not just generosity. It was an echo, a continuation, an invisible thread that tied past and present with a knot of silence and compassion. And there, between the pain and the rain, Chaik understood he wasn't just being fed. He was being rescued. A gesture of gratitude, coming from where he least expected it. And the heart, hardened by so many losses, began very slowly to soften, like clay underwater, like a man who begins, for the first time in a long time, to want to get up, to give back, to redeem yourself, to honor. The altar was still there, silent, like a sentinel of memories, and in front of him, Chaik stood for a few minutes that seemed like a lifetime. Obiora, the man in the photo, was not just an employee. He was a confidant, a guardian, someone who saw beyond the walls of the company and the cold figures. Obiora knew Chaik's fears, the unspoken silences. He died protecting more than a body. He died protecting a friend who never knew how to show gratitude. Time has not explained everything, but it has brought the necessary weight. Seeing that photo at the altar of Ngozi was like receiving a slap from strong but fair fate. She didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he had done or not done. And even so, he welcomed him. No judgment, no charge, with the same instinct that her brother had when he stretched out his own body over the danger. In the days that followed, Chaik returned to the clay bench. But something about him had changed. He looked more to the sky. He breathed more slowly. And when Ngozi returned to the plate, his eyes lingered on hers, as if silently asking for forgiveness. She, not understanding the depth of that look, just smiled. And that was enough, because there are encounters that heal more than 1,000 words. There are looks that heal old wounds just by existing. It was then that Chaik decided to do something he hadn't done in years. Wrote. With trembling hands, he fetched paper, ink, and wrote a short letter in simple words. Then he wrapped it in a leather envelope, along with the document. And on a clear morning, he handed it to Ngozi. He did not explain. He just said, "If one day you think about giving it all up, open it." And he left, with the step of someone who delivers something sacred and does not expect a return. Ngozi kept the envelope for months, tucked away, hidden among tablecloths and silent prayers. There were days when I thought about opening, others in which he forgot. But life was still difficult. The son's illness did not subside. The debts grew. And on one of those days when everything seems to say enough, she opened it. What he found there was not just a piece of paper. It was an answer. It was a gesture that came from afar. A gesture that said, without saying, "I know who you are, and now you will know who I was." The past at last had knocked on the door, not with fury, but with redemption. And in that instant, something inside her also changed. Because there are turns that don't make noise, but change everything. Like a leather envelope, like a silent inheritance, like the echo of a sacrifice which was finally honored. Ngozi's hand trembled as it broke the seal. The envelope exuded an old smell of dried leather, as if it carried more than papers, as if it carried memory, Farewell and Gratitude. Inside, there was a title deed, a bakery, land, oven, structure ready, everything registered in his name. No debt, no catches, a gift she never asked for, and along with it, a brief letter, handwritten, in firm but wounded handwriting. Your brother saved my life. You saved my soul. Ngozi read it once, twice, 3 times. Then he hugged the envelope as if holding a rediscovered son. He cried silently, not of sadness, but of astonishment, of healing, of recognition. For the first time in many years, she felt that someone had seen what she was, not just the saleswoman, the lonely mother, the woman who served dishes without expecting a return. Someone had noticed the strength hidden behind the oil-stained clothes. And that someone, it was the man on the bench. She never knew his full name. He never asked. But now he understood the gesture. He knew. He knew everything. He knew who she was. He knew what his brother had done. He knew the weight she carried. And in silence he reciprocated, not with speech, not with promises, but with an act, a gesture of redemption that said more than any apology. In the following days, news of the new bakery spread quickly through the neighborhood, but Ngozi said little. She rebuilt the space with her mother's recipes, the hands of widowed neighbors, and the faith that has always sustained her. He painted the walls light blue, like the sky after the storm, and at the first loaf he took out of the oven, he said a prayer in a low voice, by Obiora, by Chaik, by herself, for the possibility of a new beginning. The leather envelope was kept in a wooden box, along with the Sunday clothes and the old photograph of his brother. She never read the letter again, but the words remained, engraved on the chest, like a tattoo made of affection and silence. Because some phrases don't need to be repeated. They become part of us, part of the story, part of what one day seemed lost and now, finally, had been restored. The bakery rose like a flower in the midst of the rubble, small, smelly, with an old bell at the entrance that rang whenever someone opened the door. Ngozi didn't need any ads. People came, by the smell, by the memory, by the firm hand that kneaded the dough as if praying. The neighbors who had already lost everything came and found a job there. The orphans of dignity came and found a home there, because the place didn't just sell bread. He sold shelter, healing silence, presence. She didn't talk about the man on the bench. When asked about the sudden change, she smiled out of the corner of her eye and replied, "It was the echo of an ancient gesture. I only returned what I received." No one fully understood, but everyone felt it. There was something there that didn't fit the words, something that could only be recognized by those who had already been injured and yet chose to continue. The recipes came from his mother. The way of attending came from the soul. And the care for others, this was his brother's inheritance. The same Obiora who had given his life without hesitation was now still alive in Ngozi's gesture. She didn't want fame. I didn't want applause. She just wanted no one else to go through the hunger she knew. I wanted every batch to be like that jollof rice dish, a silent offering, a ransom disguised as routine. And so it flourished. No lights, no reporters, no social network, only with the heat of the oven and the firmness of someone who has already been knocked down, but has learned to get up with grace. And perhaps because of this, his bakery was never empty, because there are places where the soul finds rest, and where the bread tastes like forgiveness as a souvenir of continuity. Ngozi never had to say his name, but every day, when she closed the bakery, she looked up at the sky for a moment, and he whispered a prayer, not for you, but for that man she fed, not knowing that, by doing so, she was turning on a light in his darkness, a light that now shone also in his own history, discreet, but unforgettable. The bank remained, even after the man disappeared, even after the rains returned. The children grew up. The days went on as the days go on in haste and oblivion. No one else saw Chaik. Some said that he had returned to Lagos. Others swore they saw him boarding a bus heading north. But no one knew for sure. He left as he lived there, in silence, quietly, no farewell, as if his mission had been fulfilled, and time now belonged to others. But the bank was still there, and in time, someone nailed a wooden board to it, simple, rustic, with handwritten lyrics. Here sat a man who has relearned how to live. No one claimed responsibility for the plaque, but everyone knew. Ngozi, she was the one who, every Friday, came at dusk and placed flowers on the bench. Not expensive orchids, nor packed bouquets, only flowers from the forest, picked calmly, sometimes hibiscus, sometimes small sunflowers. as if each petal was a word she never had to say. The neighborhood began to respect the place. No boy dared to climb on the bench. No adult touched bags there. It was like an open altar, a reminder that even in poverty, there are gestures that are worth more than fortune. And there on that clay bench was inscribed a story that few knew completely, but that everyone felt in the air. The story of a man who lost everything and found redemption in an anonymous woman's simple dish. The story of a woman who, without knowing who she served, ended up serving her own healing. The bank has aged over time. Like everything that is true, the wood darkened, the earth around it turned to trampled clay, but the plaque remained firm. And every Friday, the flower was there, always one, always fresh, like a silent vow of memory, like a heart that does not forget, like the last chapter of a story told with gestures, not voices, a story that taught that entire village, and perhaps the world, that sometimes sitting next to someone is the first step to rebuilding them. And in that empty bank, there was more presence than in many palaces. He had bequeathed it. There was faith. There was a reminder that true wealth, it is invisible. It was getting dark slowly. The sky, tinged with orange and purple, seemed to bless with silence all that had been silent for so long. Inside the house, with his children around the stove, Ngozi broke the freshly baked bread with the firm hands of someone who had not forgotten his hunger. The boys laughed, fought over bigger pieces, asked about tomorrow. And she, with the serenity of someone who has already lost everything and yet chose to start over, looked at each one of them as if to say, "You are my legacy." That night, she told a story, not with names or dates, but with soul. He said that a woman once fed a stranger, every day, without knowing who he was. He said that this man carried such a deep pain that he no longer believed in love, but that, over time, with the simple gestures, he remembered that it was still possible to trust. He said that sometimes the greatest inheritance that is left is not money, nor land. It's the courage to keep being good, even after everything. Some billionaires don't have cars. They have hearts that they learn to lose in order to give, she said. And the children listened with attentive eyes, as if feeling that the truth is between the lines. Ngozi didn't need to explain further. History was alive there, in the flower under the nails, in the serene smile, in the heat of the oven that now warmed other lives. Outside, the mud bench remained in the same place. The Friday flower swayed in the wind, and the wooden sign gleamed in the evening light. And in that simple scenario, a humble house, a living bakery, a silent bench rested the proof that there are riches that cannot be seen, that are not counted in figures, nor are they hung on the wall. They are riches that are given, that are shared, that become bread, and memory. And those who go through this story, even if they don't know the names, feel something has changed, something has been restored. Because true goodness, when it is born of mourning, faith, and compassion, it transforms everything it touches, even if it rings silently, even if it rings only once. And remember, not every miracle comes with lights and applause. Sometimes it comes in the form of a simple gesture, like a shared plate, a respected silence, a faceless kindness. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that there is still beauty in the unseen, strength in what is humble, and hope where it is least expected. Leave your like, activate the notification bell, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments.